Playing with fire. It's up there as one of the best old-school cichlids for the larger community, but did you know it makes a great breeding project too? Gabor Horvath explains. We've all been there. You set up a community tank, fill it up with mixed proportions of various shoaling fish, and it's only when you sit back to enjoy your completed aquarium that you realise something's missing. You've got heaps of movement, the fish are all sparkling, but the tank still seems to lack a focal point. That's usually when we start some post hoc thinking about stocking, and our minds turn to a centrepiece fish. In smallish tanks, many aquarists fall back on the tried and tested fillers of dwarf cichlids or diminutive gourami to plug the gaps, being mostly peaceful and, this is the important part, highly visible. But finding the right-sized peaceful equivalent for a more spacious community setup can be problematic. Problematic, that is, until you find the mild-tempered firemouth cichlids. This is my own story of how I met two related yet so different members of the Thorichthes genus. Keeping it real. My first encounter with the real firemouth cichlid, Thorichthes miki, happened 3 decades ago when I was still at university and sharing a dormitory room with 2 classmates. The limited space and the reservations of my roommates allowed me to only have 1 aquarium, and after getting special permission for a fish tank from the dormitory director, I decided to set it up for medium-sized cichlids plus some live bearers as companions and dither fish. Following a long search, there weren't many fish shops in Hungary in the 90s, I managed to buy a pair of firemouth cichlids, and I hoped to form a pair. Back then they were called Cyclosoma miki, because almost every cichlid from the Central American region was considered to belong to the Cyclosoma genus at the time. Unfortunately, my pair turned out to be 2 females, so I had to give up any hope of breeding them. Then, to my great surprise, I had found that one of the females paired up with another ex-Cyclosoma male in the tank, a convict cichlid, now Amatitilania nigrofasciata. They spawned and they raised their young like any other cichlid couple. I know many folks frown upon hybridizing, as I do now, but as a young aquarist I felt like I'd achieved something special, and not having the internet to check if anyone else had managed this feat, I started to prepare my speech for the Nobel Prize. After speaking to an expert aquarist who confirmed that it's not a one-off occasion, I was brought back to Earth. I was curious to see how the offspring would turn out, so I kept 10 of them to raise separately, and I managed to smuggle a small tank into the dormitory for the initial growth phase. At around 2 centimetres they had the body shape of their firemouth mum, complete with the pointed nose, and the strong body markings of the convict father. With no other tanks to move them to, I gave the group to a nearby aquarist. I have never heard anything back from him, nor saw the juveniles after. Reacquainted. Fast forward 30 years. During a visit to a friend, I spotted a shoal of young fish resembling my hybrids. They looked like proper T. miki, but with a very dark, almost black body. After inquiring about their origin, I learnt that they weren't hybrids, but a regional variety from the Rio Mamtanil called T. miki angeles. This morph is often sold as the black firemouth, owing to some individuals, especially females, occasionally having a full black body. These dark females usually have yellowish throats instead of the traditional red. I mainly stick with the smaller community fish species, but seeing these beauties I couldn't resist the temptation. I purchased 8 juveniles, my usual practice when I plan to breed a certain fish. I find this number increases the chances of having at least 1 breeding pair from the group. I also find that these self-formed couples are more productive and have stronger bonds than the pair put together by myself. When the fish were in a quarantine tank, I prepared their final quarters. Firemouth cichlids occur from Mexico down to Guatemala, where they often live in still or slow-moving shallow waters. Their broad distribution brings with it a wide tolerance for environmental conditions, so they could feel at home in most community tanks with slightly acidic to alkaline, medium hard water, 6.5 to 8 pH, and over 6H. They can be kept at temperature range between 22 to 30 degrees Celsius, with 24 to 27 degrees C appearing optimal for both breeding and longevity. I didn't plan to create a strict biotype tank, but rather something with the essential features for optimal development and breeding. Firemouths love digging into the substrate for food. The telescopically protruding mouth allows them to suck up particles and sediment while searching for edible morsels, with the inedible pieces then expelled through their gill openings. To support this, I used a particularly fine gravel as a substrate. Considering the territorial behaviour so characteristic of cichlids, large pieces of bogwood were used to break up the line of sight and divide the tank into smaller living spaces. Anubias mother plants were then attached to this wood, with their roots forming a loose curtain, and a few coconut shells were added as potential spawning sites. As a finishing touch, rosettes of floating water lettuce, Piscia, were introduced to provide shaded areas. As firemouths can reach quite a modest size, males up to about 15 centimetres, a JBL external filter was called upon to keep the water clean. To reduce the risk of aggression, I always used ditherfish in cichlid tanks. The fish I selected here was the golden variety of the ever-popular molly Persphylius sphenops. As they live together in the wild, this can also be recommended for a biotope. Sexual rivalry. My young firemouths grew quite quickly, and soon I could determine their sexes. Out of the 8 fish, I had 2 males and 6 females. This was very lucky, as males are usually more troublesome than females. Firemouth cichlid. Scientific name, Thorichthys meeki. Pronunciation, Thorichthys meeki. Size, 13 to 14 centimetres. Tank size, 120 by 30 by 30. Origin, Central America, Mexico down to Guatemala and Belize. Habitat ranges from shallow streams and cenotes to pods and ditches. To pools and ditches. Tank size, 120 by 30 by 30 centimetres. Water requirements, slightly acidic to alkaline water, 6 to 8 pH, 2 to 18 H. Temperature, 22 to 30 degrees C. Temperament, relatively peaceful, larger community species, sometimes territorial with its own. Feeding, wholly unfuzzy, offer flakes, pellets, live and frozen daphnia as well as bloodworm. Availability and cost. Very common, juveniles starting from around £3.50. Sexing firemouth juveniles is quite difficult, but when reaching breeding size at around 5 to 8 centimetres, the males sport dorsal and anal fins with longer filaments. My 2 males each quickly found a partner and formed their territories, and there's a certain hierarchy which can be observed from their interactions. Interestingly, any hostility ceases during feeding time, only to resume as soon as dinner has been finished. Out of my 2 couples, one is the dominant pair, kind of king and queen of the tank. They are in the right half of the aquarium, making it a no-go zone for the other pair. Lone females may enter the area, but only when there are no eggs or fry present. Between the territories of the 2 pairs lays a demarcation zone. This, no fish's land, acts as a buffer area, and the members of the 2 couples regularly patrol it so that the enemy doesn't overstep the borders. When that happens, the defending pair launches a warning attack with flaring red throats and fully stretched fins. Usually a tug of war follows, with the pairs swimming back and forth in threatening poses. The face-off mainly ends with a subdominant pair retreating to their own territory. Similar interactions can be observed between the single females, who have their own pecking order. The subordinate fish signals its submission by tilting its head down and clamping the fins. The winner usually gives a mostly gentle headbutt to the side of the subject, and then the fish all go on their separate ways. One interesting interplay is when a lonely female tries to seduce a male on patrol. She sports her best colours, shaking her body in front of the male and indicating her readiness to spawn. This usually happens when the male's partner is occupied with eggs or fry, therefore providing no immediate chance for further breeding, and sometimes the male seems to yield, showing interest and beginning to dance with the temptress. The atmosphere quickly changes when his partner, noticing the male's long absence, arrives at the scene, leaving the eggs or fry behind. The female attacks the rival female. The female attacks the rival female with full fury, and the male, recognizing his mistake, joins the attack, chasing her away. Then the couple returns to the family, with the female regularly nudging the side of the unfaithful male with her head.